The cold, sterile light of the hotel room did little to warm the pre-dawn chill that had settled over. Washington, D.C. Pam Bondi sat at a small, circular table, a fortress of legal binders and highlighted documents built around a single, steaming mug of black coffee. The city outside was still a tapestry of sleeping lights, but inside this room, the day had begun hours ago. Her gaze was fixed on a single paragraph in a well-worn copy of a Supreme Court opinion, her lips moving silently, rehearsing not just words, but the cadence, the pauses, the precise emotional weight each syllable would carry. This was not just another case. This was States v. Onmdata, a legal battle that had transcended the courtroom and become a flashpoint in the national conversation about privacy, technology, and the very nature of a free society in the digital age. The weight of it felt physical, a pressure on her chest that had been a constant companion for weeks. She was not just representing a coalition of states. She felt she was defending a principle that was slipping away, eroded by the relentless tide of innovation that rarely paused to consider its own consequences. Her junior counsel, Anya Sharma, a brilliant and impossibly young lawyer whose eyes held a mixture of awe and sheer terror, sat across from her. Anya was meticulously organizing a fresh set of notes, her movements precise and quiet, as if a single misplaced paper might disrupt the fragile concentration in the room. The latest tracking polls on public sentiment are in, Anya said, her voice soft. Support for our position has ticked up to points overnight. The media narrative is shifting. They're finally starting to frame it as a question of digital rights, not just corporate regulation. Pam nodded slowly, her eyes not leaving the page. The public square is one thing, Anya. The 9 robed figures in that marble temple are another. Public opinion doesn't file amicus briefs. She finally looked up, her expression a careful mask of composure. Inside, her mind was a whirlwind of branching arguments, potential rebuttals, and the ever-present ghost of a single, devastating question from the bench for which she might have no answer. She had prepared for everything, drilled her team relentlessly, and yet the unpredictability of oral argument before the Supreme Court was a variable no amount of preparation could fully eliminate. The case centered on Onmdata's revolutionary platform, codenamed Prometheus. It was an artificial intelligence system of staggering complexity, capable of vacuuming up billions of data points, daily social media posts, public records, commercial transactions, satellite imagery, traffic patterns, and weaving them into a predictive model of human behavior. Onmdata marketed it as the ultimate tool for market analysis, urban planning, and even public safety. They argued it was nothing more than sophisticated data aggregation, protected speech under the First Amendment, the digital equivalent of a newspaper reporting on public events. The coalition of states, led by Bondi, argued it was something far more invasive. They contended that by creating predictive profiles of individuals and communities, Prometheus constituted a form of mass surveillance, a digital search of unprecedented scale conducted without warrants or probable cause, chilling free expression and association. It could predict protest movements before they formed, identify potential dissidents, and create a society where the mere thought of stepping out of line was preemptively discouraged by an invisible, all-knowing algorithm. The legal question was a tightrope walk. Where did the First Amendment protection for data collection end, and the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches begin? Across town, in a suite overlooking the Capitol Dome, Julian Croft, lead counsel for Onmdata, was starting his day with a confident smile. He stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Everything is under control, Mr. Harrison," he said, speaking to Onmdata's reclusive CEO. "The legal framework is on our side. The precedents concerning data in the public square are clear. The states are running an emotional argument, a ghost story about a future that doesn't exist. The justices, particularly the Chief Justice, are pragmatists. They value stability. They won't upend the digital economy based on hypotheticals." Croft was the embodiment of corporate legal power. His suit was impeccable, his arguments polished to a mirror shine, and his record before the court was formidable. He saw this case not as a philosophical struggle, but as a matter of applying existing law to new technology, a task at which he excelled. He believed Bondi was a capable politician, but out of her depth in the nuanced world of constitutional law, he saw her as predictable, her arguments as heartfelt but ultimately unsophisticated. It was a miscalculation that would, in a few short hours, prove to be profound. The drive to the Supreme Court was a study in contrasts. The streets of D.C. were waking up, filled with the mundane energy of a Tuesday morning. But as their car approached the magnificent white marble building, the atmosphere shifted. The steps were already crowded with reporters, photographers, and protesters. Signs bobbed in the air, some reading "Innovation, not intrusion," others, "My mind is not your data." The noise was a dull roar, a physical manifestation of the debate gripping the nation. As Pam stepped out of the car, the cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. She held up a hand, a calm smile fixed on her face. "Today, we will have a respectful and substantive discussion about one of the most important issues of our time," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We have faith in the process and in the wisdom of the court." "Thank you." She and Anya, flanked by security, moved through the throng and up the iconic steps, the weight of the moment pressing down with every footfall. Inside, the great hall was cavernous and hushed, the noise of the outside world silenced by thick stone walls. The busts of former Chief Justices stared down with impassive marble eyes. Tourists spoke in whispers. The sense of history and solemnity was overwhelming. Pam took a deep breath, letting the silence center her. She had argued in many courts, but this was different. This was the arena where law became legacy. Her team was waiting in a small, private conference room. They ran through the final checklist. Key precedents were confirmed. The order of arguments was set. Contingency plans for unexpected questions were reviewed one last time. Anya handed Pam a glass of water, her hand trembling slightly. "You're ready for this," Anya said. More to reassure herself than her boss, Pam met her gaze and offered a small, genuine smile. "We are ready for this," she corrected gently. "Now, let's go make our case." As they entered the courtroom itself, the atmosphere grew even more intense. The room was smaller than most people imagine from television, creating an intimacy that amplified the pressure. The mahogany was dark and rich, the crimson drapes heavy. The press section was packed, sketches artists already at work. In the public gallery, every seat was filled. Pam took her place at the counsel table, arranging her notes. Across the aisle, Julian Croft gave her a polite, almost dismissive nod. He looked completely at ease, chatting quietly with his co-counsel. Pam ignored him, focusing on the empty bench before her. 9 chairs, 9 minds, 9 distinct judicial philosophies. Her argument had to be a key that could fit, if not unlock. All of them. At precisely 10 o'clock, a marshal struck the gavel, the sound cracking through the silence. The Honorable, the Chief Justice, and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States, he intoned. Everyone in the room rose as the 9 justices emerged from behind the crimson curtain and took their seats. The rustle of their black robes was the only sound. Chief Justice John Roberts, his expression serious and composed, sat in the center. He surveyed the courtroom, his eyes briefly meeting Pam's, then Croft's. "We will hear argument this morning in Case 23-145, the States Petitioners versus Omnidata Corporation." He paused, his gaze settling on the table to his left. "Mr. Croft, you may begin whenever you are ready." Julian Croft rose and walked to the lectern with the fluid confidence of a man in his element. "Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court," he began, his voice resonant and clear. "For centuries, this court has affirmed that the collection and dissemination of information, particularly information willingly placed in the public domain, is a cornerstone of the First Amendment. Omnidata has not invented a new principle. We have simply applied a timeless one to new technology." He proceeded to lay out his case with masterful precision. He argued that Prometheus did nothing more than what researchers, journalists, and corporations had always done: gather public information to understand the world. The fact that it did so with unprecedented speed, And scale did not change the fundamental nature of the act. He fielded questions from the justices with ease. Justice Breyer, pragmatic as ever, pressed him on the potential for misuse. What if this technology is used to create a chilling effect on speech? Mr. Croft, if people know that attending a rally or even just liking a post online will be logged, analyzed, and stored forever by a system they don't understand, might they not simply choose to remain silent? Croft was ready. With respect, Justice Breyer, that is a speculative harm. The First Amendment does not protect us from the social or economic consequences of our public speech. If you publish a letter in a newspaper, you cannot then complain that people have read it and formed an opinion of you. Prometheus is simply a hyper-efficient reader of a digital newspaper that we all contribute to every day. He was smooth, unflappable. He navigated a sharp, text-based question from Justice Gorsuch on the original understanding of searches, and a more philosophical inquiry from Justice Sotomayor about the disparate impact such a system could have on minority communities. To each, he had a polished, doctrinally sound response. He was painting a picture of the states as Luddites, afraid of progress, seeking to stifle innovation based on a vague, unquantifiable fear. Pam listened, her face impassive. She made a few notes, but her primary focus was on the justices, on their questions, on the subtle shifts in their posture and expression. She was watching the chessboard, seeing how the pieces were being moved, waiting for her turn. The Chief Justice had been relatively quiet, asking only a few clarifying questions about the technical aspects of the algorithm. This was his style, to guide, to clarify, to seek a narrow path through the thicket of a complex case. He was the guardian of the court's institutional credibility, always wary of broad, sweeping rulings that could be perceived as judicial overreach. Croft seemed to be playing directly to this instinct, offering the court a way to rule in his favor without making seismic changes to constitutional law. Just apply the old rules, he was saying, and let the future sort itself out. When his time was up, Croft gave a slight bow of his head and returned to his seat, a flicker of a self-satisfied smile on his lips. He had done well. The room seemed to feel it. A low murmur went through the press gallery. Anya shot Pam a worried look. Pam simply took a slow, deliberate sip of water. Then, the Chief Justice looked at her. Ms. Bondi. Pam rose and walked to the lectern, though it felt cool and solid beneath her hands. She took a moment, making eye contact with the Chief Justice, then letting her gaze sweep across the entire bench. The silence in the room was absolute. A palpable entity. Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court, she began, her voice steady, devoid of the soaring rhetoric Croft had employed. It was calm, measured, almost conversational. My learned friend, Mr. Croft, suggests that this case is about applying old principles to new technologies. We respectfully disagree. This case is about recognizing that a change in scale, when it is this vast, becomes a change in kind. She started by framing the issue not as a matter of technology, but of power, the power of a single, private entity, to know more about the citizenry than the government itself, without any of the constitutional checks and balances that constrain state power. She argued that the Fourth Amendment was not just about physical trespass, a point the court had affirmed in other digital privacy cases. It was about protecting a reasonable expectation of privacy. Is it reasonable, she posited, for an American citizen to expect that their every public utterance, every commercial transaction, every trip to the grocery store, when aggregated with billions of other data points, will not be used to generate a predictive score of their future behavior, a score they can neither see nor contest? Justice Alito interjected. But Ms. Bondi, all of this information you describe is public. People chose to share their location on social media. They chose to use a credit card. Where is the state intrusion? Where is the search in the constitutional sense? This was the heart of the other side's argument, and Pam was ready for it. With respect, Justice Alito, the search is not in the collection of any single piece of data. The search is the algorithm itself. It is the act of programmatic, systematic, and ceaseless analysis of the collective whole of a person's life. In the public sphere, the framers could not have conceived of a general warrant. that could surveil every citizen simultaneously. But that is the functional equivalent of what Prometheus achieves. It is a dragnet for the soul. The argument continued, a tense volley of questions and answers. She held her own, parrying inquiries from the conservative wing about states' rights and from the liberal wing about the need for a clear, administrable rule. She was solid, competent, and deeply knowledgeable, but she hadn't yet landed a decisive blow. Julian Croft watched, his posture relaxed, a look of professional appreciation on his face. She was performing better than he'd expected, but he still believed her argument was built on a foundation of sand. The existing precedents were a fortress around him. The Chief Justice had remained quiet for most of her presentation, his face an unreadable mask of judicial neutrality. He let his colleagues probe and press. Pam was keenly aware of the clock ticking down. She had built her case, laid the foundation, but she needed something to break through the doctrinal stalemate. She needed to make the stakes personal, not in an emotional sense, but in a judicial one. She needed to connect it to their own work, their own legacy. With about 10 minutes remaining in her time, the Chief Justice finally leaned forward, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the room. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his tone measured and academic, "let us assume for a moment that the potential for misuse you describe is real. The challenge for this court is always where to draw a line. Mr. Croft argues for the existing line, the public-private information distinction. You are asking us to draw a new line based on the scale and scope of data analysis. How can we possibly craft a ruling that is not, by its very nature, arbitrary? Where's the limiting principle? At 1 million data points, a billion. At what point does data collection become a constitutional concern? Can you provide a clear, workable standard for lower courts to follow?" This was the question, the one designed to corner her. It was a classic Roberts move, a demand for judicial restraint, for a narrow, manageable rule. He was inviting her to get lost in the weeds of technicalities, to propose a complex, multi-factor test that the court could then pick apart as unworkable. A wave of anxiety washed over Anya. This was the trap. Croft smirked, ever so slightly. He knew this question well. It was the judicial equivalent of check. Pam paused. The entire courtroom held its breath. She looked directly at the Chief Justice, not as a lawyer to a judge, but as one steward of the law to another. The air crackled with anticipation. This was the moment. She did not look down at her notes. Her hands rested calmly on the lectern. "Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice," she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "The search for a limiting principle is indeed the central question, but I would respectfully suggest that the court has already provided one, a clear, workable standard that this case puts directly to the test. It is a standard that you, yourself, Mr. Chief Justice, articulated with such powerful clarity." A ripple of surprise went through the room, directly invoking a justice's own words, especially the Chief Justice's, was a high-risk, high-reward strategy. It could be seen as presumptuous, even disrespectful. But Pam's tone was one of profound respect, as if she were genuinely seeking to understand, not to confront. The Chief Justice's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed, a flicker of intense focus appearing. He did not interrupt. "In your unanimous opinion for the court in Riley versus California," Pam continued, her voice resonating with quiet authority, "you addressed the question of whether police could search the contents of a person's cell phone incident to an arrest. The state of California argued, much like Mr. Croft does today, for a simple application of an old rule, the search incident to arrest doctrine. They argued a phone was just another container found on an arrestee's person, like a wallet or a cigarette pack." She paused, letting the parallel hang in the air. "But you, Mr. Chief Justice, rejected that simple analogy. You recognize that a modern smartphone, and I quote, is not just another technological convenience. With all they contain and all they may reveal, they hold for many Americans the privacies of life. You found that a change in the quantity of information stored on a device, the sheer scale of it, necessitated a change in the quality of its constitutional protection." The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the sketch artists had stopped moving. Every justice was leaning forward. Julian Croft's confident posture had vanished. He was sitting bolt upright, his brow furrowed, a dawning look of alarm on his face. He saw where she was going. Pam pressed on, her pace deliberate, each word landing like a carefully placed stone. "You explained in Riley that the search of a cell phone was a profound invasion of privacy. Because of 4 key factors: the immense storage capacity, the variety of data types, the logged history of a person's movements and communications, and the fact that data on a phone could be stored remotely in the cloud. You concluded that allowing a warrantless search of a phone would be like allowing the state to rummage through the entirety of a person's life, and therefore, a warrant was required." She then turned, gracefully and devastatingly, back to the case at hand. "Mr. Chief Justice, the Prometheus system is the full realization of the very threat you warned us about in Riley. It is Riley on a global scale. If one person's phone contains the privacies of life, then Prometheus, which aggregates the digital lives of hundreds of millions, contains the privacies of our entire society. Every factor you identified in Riley applies to Prometheus, but magnified 1 billion-fold. It has near-infinite storage capacity. It analyzes every conceivable type of data. It creates a permanent, searchable log of not just one person's life, but of our collective public life, and like the data on a phone, connecting to the cloud, it connects every disparate piece of our digital footprint into one coherent, deeply revealing whole." The Chief Justice was motionless, his face a granite mask. He had built his judicial legacy on principles of minimalism, precedent, and institutional caution. Pam Bondi was now using his own landmark opinion, one of his most celebrated for its thoughtful embrace of technology's impact on rights, as a logical weapon against the very minimalism he championed. She was showing him that the principle he established in Riley could not be contained, that it had logical consequences that extended far beyond the search of a single phone. She was forcing him to either retreat from the powerful logic of his own opinion or apply it to this case, a move that would constitute the very opposite of a minimal ruling. He tried to find an escape route, but "Ms. Bondi," he interjected, his voice tight. "The critical fact in Riley was the search by the government. Here, the actor is a private corporation, Omnidata. The Fourth Amendment does not typically apply to private actors. It was a lifeline, an attempt to re-establish the traditional doctrinal boundary she was trying to erase." Pam met his gaze without flinching. Her response was immediate, calm, and devastatingly precise. "Respectfully, Mr. Chief Justice, that distinction becomes a fiction when the private actor's entire business model is to sell this information or its fruits to the government, which Omnidata's own contracts confirm they do. The states are often their biggest clients. When a private entity becomes an arm of the state's data collection apparatus, a de facto agent of surveillance, the constitutional protections must follow. To rule otherwise would be to create a blueprint for the government to bypass the Fourth Amendment entirely. It could simply outsource its surveillance to a company like Omnidata, and then purchase the results. The warrant requirement you so carefully protected in Riley would be rendered meaningless, a relic of an analog age." A visible tremor of shock registered on Julian Croft's face. He scribbled a frantic note to his co-counsel. He had not prepared for this line of attack. He had prepared for a frontal assault on corporate rights, not a surgical strike using the Chief Justice's own jurisprudence as the scalpel. The other justices were silent, watching the intellectual duel between the advocate and the Chief Justice. With rapt attention, they understood the depth of the challenge Bondi had just laid down. Roberts faltered, for the first time in the memory of most seasoned court observers. The Chief Justice of the United States seemed to be at a loss. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He looked down at his own notes, then back at Bondi. The internal conflict was visible on his face. He was trapped in a logical box of his own making. Any path he took was fraught with peril. If he argued against her, he would be undermining the very foundation of one of his most significant opinions. If he agreed with her, he would be endorsing a massive expansion of privacy rights and a fundamental reordering of the digital economy, the kind of activist ruling he had spent his entire career cautioning against. Bondi knew she had him, but she did not gloat. She did not raise her voice. She maintained her posture of respectful inquiry. She gave him the space to process the dilemma she had created. This was the pinnacle of advocacy, not to defeat an opponent, but to change the way they see the board. Finally, seeing he had no immediate rebuttal, she delivered her conclusion, her voice imbued with a quiet, profound gravity. Mr. Chief Justice, the states are not asking this court to invent a new right or to draw an arbitrary line in the sand. We are asking this court to have the courage of its own convictions. We are asking you to affirm that the principles you so eloquently defended in Riley are not confined to the four corners of a smartphone, but that they apply to the preservation of liberty. In the digital age, the question before you is not whether to be bold or to be cautious. The question is whether the Fourth Amendment, as you have interpreted it, will endure. The choice is to apply the profound wisdom of Riley or to render it a historical artifact. We urge you to choose the path of enduring constitutional principle. She paused, then added a simple, thank you. Her time was up. She gathered her papers. With steady hands, gave a slight nod to the bench, and walked back to her counsel table. A heavy, stunned silence filled the courtroom. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. No one moved, no one spoke. The Chief Justice stared blankly at the lectern where she had just stood, his face pale. The other justices looked from him to Bondi and back again. Julian Croft sat slumped in his chair, his confident facade completely shattered. He had been outmaneuvered, his entire case strategy rendered irrelevant in the space of 5 minutes. Anya Sharma looked at Pam Bondi, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and utter adoration. She had just witnessed a moment that would be taught in law schools for generations. Chief Justice Roberts cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Thank you, counsel, he said, his voice strained. He looked at Croft. Mr. Croft, you have 4 minutes remaining for rebuttal. The invitation was a formality, but it sounded like a death sentence. Julian Croft rose and walked to the lectern, but the swagger was gone. He looked like a man who had just been told the rules of the game had been changed. After he had already made his final move, he shuffled his notes, his hands unsteady. Mr. Chief Justice, he began, his voice lacking its earlier resonance. Ms. Bondi's reliance on Riley is misplaced. He tried to relitigate the public-private distinction, but the argument now sounded hollow, technical, and weak. He was trying to rebuild a dam that had already been breached. The justices' questions, when they came, were perfunctory. The energy had left the room. The debate had already been decided, not on the ultimate outcome of the vote, which was still unknown, but on the intellectual terms of engagement. Pam Bondi had reframed the entire case. Croft stammered through the remainder of his time, his arguments falling flat, and returned to his seat, a man comprehensively defeated. The Chief Justice, looking weary, announced the case was submitted, and the gavel fell, officially ending the session. As the justices filed out, the courtroom erupted in a flurry of hushed, frantic whispers. Reporters scrambled for the exits, fingers already flying across their phone screens. Did you see his face? She never raised her voice. She used his own words against him. I've never seen anything like it. Pam calmly packed her briefcase. Anya was still speechless, simply shaking her head in wonder. Pam, she finally managed to whisper. That was. Pam placed a calming hand on her arm. We did what we came here to do, Anya. We made them think. As they walked out of the courtroom and into the great hall, they were met by a wall of cameras and microphones. The questions came in a torrent, no longer the general inquiries from the morning, but specific, excited questions about her strategy. Ms. Bondi, was it your plan all along to focus on the Chief Justice's opinion in Riley? Ms. Bondi, how did you feel the Chief Justice responded to your line of questioning? She held up her hand again, the same calm smile on her face, but this time, it held a spark of quiet triumph. We presented our arguments to the court as respectfully and thoroughly as we could, she said, her voice steady. We have the utmost confidence in the judicial process, and we look forward to the court's decision. We believe that the fundamental right to privacy is not a partisan issue, but an American value, and we are hopeful the court will agree. Thank you. She refused to be drawn into commenting on the Chief Justice's reaction or her specific tactics. Her dominance was so undisputed that she didn't need to proclaim it. The silence in the courtroom had spoken for her. That evening, the legal world was ablaze. Every major news network led with the story of the Supreme Court arguments. Legal panels, comprised of the nation's top constitutional scholars and former solicitors general, convened on cable news. They played the audio of the exchange between Bondi and Roberts again and again. The analysis was unanimous. A masterclass in oral advocacy, one commentator declared. She didn't just argue the case, she argued the justice. She respectfully forced the Chief Justice to confront the full implications of his own jurisprudence. It was breathtaking. Another analyst, a noted conservative legal mind, shook his head in admiration. I disagree with her on the merits, but I cannot deny the brilliance of the strategy. She turned the Chief Justice's greatest strength, his commitment to doctrinal consistency, into his greatest vulnerability in this specific case. She essentially asked him, "Which legacy do you want, sir? The minimalist who allowed the Fourth Amendment to wither, or the visionary of Riley who protected it?" There was no good answer for him. Media outlets branded it the Riley Gambit, a fearless confrontation, and the argument that silenced the chief. News articles featured side-by-side photos, Bondi, calm and focused at the lectern, and Roberts, his face a portrait of stunned contemplation. The narrative was set. Pam Bondi, through sheer force of logic and fearless preparation, had pinned the most powerful jurist in the country, leaving him with no way out of the intellectual corner she had constructed. Her performance transcended the case itself. It became a symbol of how a well-prepared advocate could challenge entrenched power, not with volume or aggression, but with intelligence and courage. In their hotel suite, Pam and Anya watched the coverage, the volume low. The adrenaline of the day had faded, leaving a profound sense of exhaustion. Anya was still buzzing, replaying the moments in her head. "They're calling it the single most effective oral argument in a decade," she said, scrolling through news alerts on her tablet. Pam was quieter, more reflective. She was staring out the window at the illuminated dome of the Capitol. "It's not about winning the news cycle, Anya," she said softly. "It's about whether we convince them. We won the argument today, but the war for the 5 votes is fought in silence, in the conference room, over the next few months." But even with that cautionary note, she couldn't suppress a small, weary smile. She had faced the highest court in the land, stared down its powerful and brilliant leader, and had not blinked. She had presented her case with every ounce of skill and conviction she possessed. She had shown zero hesitation under the immense pressure, and in doing so, had made the entire courtroom, and now the entire country, focus on the principles she was there to defend. The final outcome of States v. Onondaga was yet to be written, but the story of Pam Bondi's fearless and dominant performance was already being etched into the annals of Supreme Court history. She had left her mark, and in the process, had left the Chief Justice with a profound and inescapable choice about the future of privacy and the legacy of his court. The ball was in his court, but she had defined the court on which it would be played.